The smoke hung thick in the dimly lit backroom of the Frontier Saloon, heavy with the scent of cheap whiskey, stale tobacco, and desperation. Lantern light flickered across the scarred oak table as the final card slapped down. Serafina Whitlock stood frozen, her towering frame rigid, powerful arms crossed over her broad chest, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her former employer, a wiry gambler named Elias Crow, slumped in defeat, his face pale as moonlit snow. "She's yours now, Granger," he muttered, voice cracking. The housekeeper. Debt settled. Across the table sat Thaddeus Granger, the giant mountain man whose massive shoulders seemed to swallow the shadows. His stormy gray eyes lifted slowly, meeting hers for the first time. No triumph gleamed there, only a quiet, unreadable weight. Serafina's hazel eyes burned with a storm of shame, fury, and raw disbelief. She had come to this remote outpost seeking honest work after years of hardship, only to be wagered like a horse or a claim stake in a fool's game. The other players shifted uncomfortably, the air thick with the kind of silence that follows a life-altering blow. Serafina's fists clenched at her sides, corded muscles tensing beneath her worn sleeves. She was no delicate flower. Her body spoke of rivers crossed, wagons hauled, and earth turned under calloused hands. Yet, in this moment, she felt stripped of every scrap of dignity she had fought so hard to keep. But the truth was far more complicated than anyone imagined. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Thaddeus rose without a word, his enormous frame unfolding like an ancient oak. He stood well over 6.5 feet, every inch carved from mountain granite and quiet resolve. Dust from the trail still clung to his dark beard, streaked with silver, and his open collar shirt revealed the powerful swell of his chest. He did not gloat. He simply gathered the few papers that sealed the wager, folded them neatly, and tucked them into his vest. "Best we ride," he said, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder over the peaks. No command, just simple fact. Serafina's jaw tightened. She wanted to refuse, to shatter the table with one swing of her strong arm, but the weight of the room pressed upon her. Elias had lost everything, her services included, and the law of the frontier, harsh and unforgiving, bound such debts. Running now would mean becoming a fugitive in a land that already viewed a woman of her size and strength with suspicion. She lifted her worn leather satchel, the one containing her few possessions, a faded photograph of her late mother, a small bundle of letters, and a sturdy knife. With measured steps, she followed Thaddeus out into the cooling night air. The saloon doors creaked behind them like a final farewell. The horses waited, 2 sturdy mountain breeds. Thaddeus's stallion was a massive beast matching its rider's scale. He mounted with effortless power, then offered her a hand. Serafina ignored it, swinging up onto her own horse with the fluid strength born of necessity. Their eyes met briefly under the starlit sky, his guarded, hers defiant. They rode in silence for the first miles. The only sounds the steady clop of hooves on rocky trail and the whisper of wind through pine. Serafina kept her gaze fixed ahead, her wild chestnut braids swaying with each step. She studied the broad back of the man who now claimed her labor. What manner of soul won a woman in cards and then spoke so little? Thaddeus rode with the easy confidence of one who knew every bend in these shadowed paths. His ranch lay high in the mountains, far from the prying eyes of town. As they climbed, the air grew sharper, carrying the scent of resin and distant snow. Serafina's mind churned with questions. Would he expect more than housekeeping? Would this giant prove cruel or merely indifferent? She had survived betrayal before, but something in Thaddeus's restrained presence unsettled her more than outright menace. Hours passed. The moon climbed, bathing the trail in silver. Thaddeus slowed his horse near a narrow pass where the path widened enough for them to ride abreast. He did not look at her, but his voice carried on the breeze. House needs tending. Stock needs feedin'. Rest is yours to earn. Simple words. Yet they carried no demand for gratitude or submission. Serafina felt a flicker of wary curiosity stir beneath her anger. This was no ordinary man. His massive hands rested lightly on the reins. Hands that could break stone or cradle a wounded calf with equal care. She sensed it instinctively. Tending houses and stock don't make me property, she replied. Her tone steady, laced with quiet steel. He nodded once, a subtle dip of his head that acknowledged her without challenge. In that small gesture, a fragile thread of mutual respect began to form. Thin as morning mist, but real nonetheless. They continued upward, the ranch coming into view as the trail crested a ridge. Even in darkness, its sprawling outline spoke of weathered endurance, a large log house, sturdy barns, and fenced pastures nestled against the mountainside. Neglect showed in places loose boards, overgrown paths, but the bones were strong, much like the man who owned it. Serafina dismounted, her boots crunching on gravel. Thaddeus led the horses to the corral without instruction. She watched him move, noting the way he favored no weakness despite his immense size. A man who carried silent burdens. Inside the house, he lit a lantern. Warm golden light revealed a space that was functional yet lonely. Thick timbers, a stone hearth, simple furnishings coated in a fine layer of dust. Your room's at the end of the hall, he murmured, gesturing with one powerful arm. Kitchen's yours to orders. She set her satchel down, muscles aching from the long ride and the emotional weight of the night. As Thaddeus turned to leave her to settle, their eyes met again across the room. In his stormy gaze, she glimpsed not ownership, but a profound solitude that mirrored her own hidden longings. Yet, as they stood there, two giants framed by mountain shadows, Serafina wondered what kind of man claims a woman like a prize, and what hidden price this victory would demand of them both. The night wind howled softly through the eaves, carrying the promise of storms yet to come. The first pale light of dawn crept over the jagged peaks, painting the ranch in hues of rose and gold that softened even the roughest edges of neglect. Serafina Whitlock rose early, her powerful frame moving with purposeful quiet through the unfamiliar kitchen. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the card table's final hand and the long ride that followed. Yet here she was, sleeves rolled high on her corded arms, kneading dough with hands that knew hard labor as intimately as breathing. Thaddeus Granger stood at the far edge of the corral, his massive silhouette etched against the rising sun. He watched her through the open window, without approaching, his stormy gray eyes steady and unreadable. There was no smug satisfaction in his posture, only the patient vigilance of a man accustomed to solitude. He split logs with rhythmic precision, each swing of the axe revealing the immense power in his shoulders and back. Yet he moved as if the weight of the world rested lightly upon him. Serafina felt his gaze like a distant mountain wind, present, but not intrusive. She shaped the loaves and slid them into the wood-fired oven, the scent of baking bread soon filling the house like a quiet promise of steadiness. It was a small act of dignity, claiming the space not as a prize won, but as territory earned through honest work. In her years of drifting, she had learned that respect began with one's own hands. As the morning unfolded, she swept the wide planked floors, dusted the heavy beams, and aired out the musty rooms. Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight, swirling like forgotten memories. Thaddeus entered once to fetch a tool, his boots leaving faint prints she later smoothed away. Their paths crossed without words at first, a careful dance of two giants learning the rhythm of shared space. He nodded toward a loose cabinet hinge. She repaired it with a few deft twists of wire and strength that matched his own. No thanks were spoken, but the subtle easing of tension in his jaw spoke volumes. The air carried the crisp bite of high altitude, mingled with pine resin and the earthy musk of the surrounding wilderness. Serafina paused by the open door, inhaling deeply, her broad chest expanding as the vastness of the ranch settled into her bones. This place, though not her choice, held a raw beauty that called to the survivor in her. She caught Thaddeus glancing her way again, as he mended a fence line. His expression, one of quiet appraisal rather than judgment. In that look lingered cautious curiosity, the first fragile bridge between them. By midday, the kitchen table held fresh bread, a pot of strong coffee, and simple provisions she had arranged. Thaddeus accepted the meal with a murmured acknowledgement, his massive hands cradling the mug as if it were something precious. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the distant lowing of cattle. Serafina noted how he ate with measured restraint, a man who had known hunger of more than one kind. A warmth beat stirred in her chest, unexpected and gentle, the satisfaction of providing nourishment to someone who asked for nothing. Later, as she tended the garden plot behind the house, pulling stubborn weeds with her powerful grip, Thaddeus joined without fanfare. He worked the soil nearby, his enormous frame bent to the task. Their shared labor spoke louder than any conversation. Sweat glistened on both their brows, darkening their rugged frontier clothes. Yet, neither complained. Serafina's hazel eyes flicked to him occasionally, admiring the quiet competence in his movements. Here was a man whose strength did not bully, but built. A subtle recurring behavior emerged in him. She noticed how he always wiped his hands thoroughly on a worn cloth before touching anything inside the house, a small ritual of respect for the order she was creating. It touched something deep within her guarded heart, a reminder that dignity could bloom even in the unlikeliest soil. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Serafina explored the main room more thoroughly, straightening shelves lined with practical volumes and a few treasured keepsakes. Behind a stack of old ledgers, her fingers brushed against a yellowed envelope, its edges frayed with time. She hesitated, her compassionate nature warring with propriety. But curiosity won. The letter, addressed in a feminine hand, spoke of loss and regret, hinting at a grief that had carved deep hollows into Thaddeus's life. She tucked it back carefully, a quiet revelation that humanized the stoic giant further. The wind began to shift as evening approached, carrying the metallic tang of an oncoming storm. Dark clouds gathered over the peaks like brooding sentinels, thunder rumbling in the distance. Thaddeus secured the livestock with efficient urgency, his voice calling out brief instructions that she met with capable action. They worked in tandem, closing shutters and reinforcing doors, their massive forms moving with surprising harmony against the building gale. Inside, as rain began to lash the roof in fierce sheets, the house felt smaller, more intimate. Serafina lit lanterns, their warm glow pushing back the encroaching darkness. Thaddeus stood by the hearth, stoking the fire until flames danced high, casting flickering light across his weathered face. A second warmth beat passed between them when he handed her a dry blanket without prompting, their fingers brushing for the briefest moment. It was nothing and everything. A simple gesture that whispered of protection and budding trust. Serafina reflected silently as she prepared a simple stew, the rich aroma filling the air. She had entered this ranch as a woman won in a game, yet already she sensed layers beneath Thaddeus's restraint. His solitude mirrored her own hidden scars, and in their cautious circling, mutual respect took root. A third warmth beat came as they shared the meal by the fire. The storm howling outside while inside, tentative comfort began to weave its threads. Yet the old letter weighed on her mind. Its words a window into pains he kept locked away. As lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating their faces in stark relief, Serafina wondered what other truths the storm might unearth. The fierce mountain tempest forced them into closer quarters than either had anticipated, and with it came the growing certainty that their guarded worlds were about to collide in ways neither could yet foresee. The storm relented by morning, leaving the ranch glistening under a sky scrubbed clean. Puddles mirrored the towering pines, and the air carried the fresh, earthy scent of rain-soaked soil mingled with crushed pine needles. Serafina Whitlock stepped outside, her powerful shoulders squared against the lingering chill, sleeves already rolled to expose the corded strength of her forearms. The night's enforced closeness had left her restless, yet the shared labor of securing the house had planted a small seed of reluctant ease. Thaddeus Granger moved through the debris with deliberate power, his massive frame bending to lift a fallen branch that would have taxed 3 ordinary men. He glanced her way once, a subtle nod acknowledging her readiness. No words passed between them at first. Instead, they fell into unspoken partnership, circling the ranch buildings to assess the damage. Shingles torn loose by the wind, a section of fence collapsed under a fallen limb, and scattered tools washed from their places, all bore witness to the mountain's fury. Serafina gripped one end of a heavy timber that had shifted in the barn, her thick arms flexing as she helped Thaddeus realign it. Their combined strength made the task feel almost effortless, muscles straining in unison beneath sun-weathered skin. Sweat soon beaded on her brow, tracing paths down her strong neck, while his dark beard glistened with similar effort. In that shared exertion, a vivid sensory moment bloomed, the rough texture of weathered wood against her call-used palms, the clean ozone still lingering in the air, and the rhythmic sound of their breathing falling into natural harmony. Thaddeus's recurring habit revealed itself again. He paused after each heavy lift to wipe his massive hands thoroughly on a scrap of clean cloth tucked in his belt. A quiet ritual of care that spoke to deeper respect for the work and the space she was shaping. She noticed it with a quiet pang of admiration. Here was a giant who wielded his power with restraint, never flaunting, only applying it where needed. They worked side by side for hours, repairing the fence line where posts had buckled. Serafina drove nails with powerful swings of the hammer, each strike ringing clear and true, while Thaddeus held the rails steady with effortless might. Their towering forms cast long shadows across the muddy ground, 2 mountains of muscle laboring as equals. Lingering awkwardness still hovered, the memory of the poker table, but it softened with every joint effort. A warmth beat past when he handed her a dipper of cool water from the well without prompting, their fingers brushing as she accepted. She drank deeply, feeling the liquid soothe her parched throat, and offered a small nod of thanks. He returned it, the corner of his stormy gray eyes crinkling just slightly, as midday sun climbed, warming the damp earth and releasing its rich, loamy fragrance. They tackled the barn roof. Thaddeus climbed the ladder first, his broad back a study in controlled power. Serafina followed, her own heavy muscles flexing as she balanced tools and shingles. Up close, the scale of him became even more apparent. shoulders wide enough to block the sun, arms thick as young tree trunks. Yet he made room for her on the sloped roof, their movements coordinated, without instruction. A second warmth beat came when he steadied her, with one large hand at her elbow, as a loose shingle shifted beneath her boot. The touch was brief, protective, and gone in an instant, but it left a lingering sense of security she had not known in years. "You've done this before," Thaddeus murmured, voice low and gravelly like shifting stones. His gaze fixed on the work. Serafina paused. Hammer mid-swing. "Survival teaches what books never will." Her hazel eyes met his for a heartbeat longer than necessary, revealing a flicker of her own resilient spirit. He simply nodded. And they continued. In the rhythm of their labor, quiet admiration grew. She watched how he anticipated problems, his massive hands moving with surprising gentleness when handling delicate repairs. He, in turn, seemed to note her uncomplaining endurance, the way her wild chestnut braid whipped in the breeze as she matched his pace without falter. Partnership, unexpected and potent, began to bridge the chasm the poker game had carved. A meaningful emotional reflection settled over Serafina as they descended the ladder at last. Strength, she realized, was not merely muscle and bone, but the willingness to stand beside another when the world turned harsh. This mountain man, one in chance and cloaked in silence, carried his own hidden tempests, yet offered space for hers. It stirred a cautious comfort, a softening in the walls she had built high around her heart. They shared a simple meal of leftover bread and cheese beneath the shade of an ancient pine. The third warmth beat unfolding in the easy silence. Birds called from the branches overhead, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers newly opened by the rain. Thaddeus ate slowly, as was his way, and she noticed him saving the last piece of bread, offering it to her with a gesture that needed no words. She accepted, their eyes meeting in mutual acknowledgement. Two giants, finding rhythm in the ordinary. As afternoon waned, they cleared the final debris near the house. Thaddeus lifted a heavy water barrel that had toppled, setting it upright with a grunt of effort. Serafina gathered scattered kindling nearby. In doing so, her satchel, left open in the morning's haste, spilled a few items onto the damp ground. She moved to retrieve them, but Thaddeus reached one first. His large fingers closed around a small, worn locket that had tumbled free, its chain delicate against his calloused palm. He straightened slowly, holding it out to her, but not before his gaze lingered on the faded miniature portrait. Inside, the image of a young girl with similar strong features, alongside a man whose eyes held shadows of hardship. A subtle question crossed his weathered face, stormy eyes deepening with curiosity. Serafina's breath caught, her powerful frame tensing as she took it back, fingers brushing his in the exchange. The locket was more than a trinket. It carried echoes of a past she rarely spoke of, betrayals, lost family, the reasons a woman of her stature wandered alone. Thaddeus did not press, yet the discovery hung between them, like the last clouds of the departing storm. He returned to work with his characteristic quiet, wiping his hands once more on the cloth. But the air now carried a new layer of unspoken questions. Serafina felt exposed in a way the physical labor had not achieved, her deeper secrets brushing against the surface of their fragile partnership. As the sun dipped toward the western peaks, casting long golden light across the mended ranch, she wondered what he would make of the woman behind the housekeeper's role. The admiration they had built through shared strength now mingled with the weight of revelation. Thaddeus had glimpsed a fragment of her hidden burdens, and in that quiet moment, The dynamic between them shifted, once more, toward deeper understanding, yet laced with the uncertainty of what else lay concealed in her past. The mountains stood watchful, holding their breath for what truths the coming days would unearth. The days that followed the storm settled into a gentle rhythm, like the steady heartbeat of the mountain itself. Serafina Whitlock moved through the kitchen with quiet purpose, her towering frame filling the space without overwhelming it. The scent of fresh bread filled the air once more, golden loaves cooling on the heavy wooden table, their crusts crackling softly as they released waves of warm, yeasty comfort. She had risen before dawn again, kneading the dough with her powerful hands, each fold a small declaration of order amid the wildness surrounding them. Thaddeus Granger entered from the chill morning air, his massive boots leaving faint traces of dew on the threshold. He paused, inhaling deeply, and for the first time, the corners of his mouth softened in what might have been the ghost of approval. He wiped his large hands thoroughly on the clean cloth by the door, his recurring ritual of respect, before approaching the table. No grand words, just a simple nod as he accepted the mug of coffee she slid toward him. The steam rose between them, carrying hints of chicory and the faint wild herbs she had foraged. In the warm kitchen, small acts of care began to bridge the distance the poker game had imposed. Serafina had mended a worn harness strap he left near the door, her strong fingers working the leather with patient skill until it was supple and strong again. She placed it beside his plate without fanfare. Thaddeus regarded it for a long moment, then lifted his stormy gray eyes to hers. The gesture hung in the air, wordless yet heavy with meaning. A first warmth beat past as he ran his calloused thumb over the repaired seam, acknowledging the unseen labor. They ate in the companionable quiet that had grown familiar, the fire in the hearth popping softly. Sunlight streamed through the newly cleaned windows, illuminating dust motes that no longer lingered. Serafina felt a subtle easing in her chest, a building sense of emotional safety in this shared domestic space. This giant of a man did not demand, nor did he diminish her efforts. Instead, his presence felt like the sturdy timbers of the house, reliable, enduring. After the meal, Thaddeus lingered longer than usual. He picked up a small carving knife and a piece of pine, his enormous hands moving with surprising delicacy as he shaped a simple handle for a tool she had mentioned, needing repair. The shavings curled softly onto the table, releasing a fresh, resinous scent that mingled with the lingering bread aroma, a vivid sensory moment that wrapped around them like a gentle embrace. Serafina watched from the wash basin, her hazel eyes tracing the focused lines of his weathered face, the silver streaks in his dark beard catching the light. His restraint spoke louder than any boast. Here was a protector who offered usefulness without expectation. A second warmth beat unfolded when he handed her the finished handle, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Fits better now," he murmured, voice a low rumble that vibrated through the quiet room. She tested it, feeling the smooth wood warm from his touch, and offered a small, genuine smile, the first she had allowed herself in his presence. "It does." "Thank you." The words felt natural, not forced, and in them, trust began to take root like hardy mountain wildflowers after rain. They moved outside together to tackle the garden plot, where tender shoots pushed through the soil, enriched by the recent storm. Serafina's broad shoulders worked steadily as she turned earth, her muscular arms flexing with each thrust of the spade. Thaddeus worked parallel, his own immense strength, breaking stubborn clumps with ease. Their labor flowed without strain, a partnership deepening through the ordinary tasks of sustaining life. She noted how he adjusted his pace to match hers, never overshadowing, and it stirred a quiet admiration that softened the edges of her guarded heart. As the sun climbed higher, warming their backs and drawing the sweet fragrance of blooming herbs into the air, a meaningful emotional reflection settled over Serafina. Daily rituals, she realized, held healing power far beyond their simplicity. In the kneading of bread, the mending of tools, and the tilling of soil, 2 wounded souls were slowly weaving threads of belonging. Thaddeus carried his solitude like a heavy coat, yet he made room for her in it without demand. This was no ownership born of a card table. It felt closer to quiet redemption, a second chance offered through patient presence. A third warmth beat came during their midday break beneath the ancient pine. Serafina had packed a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried apples. They sat side by side on a fallen log, shoulders nearly touching, the vast valley stretching below them like a living tapestry of green and granites. Thaddeus broke off a piece of bread and handed it to her first, a small but significant reversal of roles. She accepted it, their eyes meeting in a moment of unspoken understanding. The mountain wind whispered through the needles overhead, carrying a sense of peace that wrapped around her powerful frame like a protective cloak. For the first time since arriving, she felt truly seen not as a prize, but as a capable woman whose strength complemented his own. The emotionally memorable moment arrived softly as they returned to work. Thaddeus paused by the well, drawing up a bucket of cool water. Instead of drinking alone, he offered her the ladle first, watching as she drank. A droplet traced down her chin, and he looked away respectfully, yet not before she caught the flicker of something deeper in his stormy gaze, protectiveness mixed with budding care. It left her heart stirring with a tenderness she had long buried under layers of hardship and self-reliance. As afternoon light slanted golden across the ranch, the fragile stability they had nurtured felt almost tangible, like the mended fences standing strong against the wilderness. Serafina wiped her brow, feeling the emotional safety grow with each shared silence and thoughtful act. Thaddeus's loyalty, though restrained, wrapped around her like the sturdy walls of the house she now tended with pride. Yet as the sun dipped lower, the sound of approaching hooves disrupted the tranquility. A rider crested the ridge, his horse lathered from the climb. He was a lean man from town, bearing news in a worn satchel. Thaddeus straightened, his massive frame tensing slightly as the visitor dismounted. Serafina felt a ripple of unease as the man's eyes flicked between them. Curiosity and something sharper in his expression. "Granger," the rider called, voice carrying across the yard. "Word from the saloon about that poker game's spreading. Folks are talking, saying the arrangement ain't proper. That a woman like her deserves better than being claimed as a housekeeper." He paused, glancing at Serafina with a mix of pity and judgment. "Elias Crow's been drinkin' and runnin' his mouth. Might bring trouble your way." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling through the peace they had so carefully cultivated. Thaddeus's jaw tightened, but he remained stoic, his powerful presence unyielding. Serafina's heart clenched with a sudden fear, not for herself alone, but for the budding trust that now felt threatened by the outside world. The visitor's news carried whispers of social pressure and potential scandal, threatening to unravel the delicate bonds forming in their isolated mountain haven. As the rider watered his horse and prepared to leave, Serafina wondered how long their fragile world could withstand the judgments of those below. The unexpected arrival cast a shadow over the day's warmth, leaving her to question whether the emotional safety they had begun to build could endure the storms gathering beyond the ranch's protective ridges. The visitor's words lingered in the cooling evening air like smoke from a dying fire, casting a subtle tension over the ranch as the man rode away down the shadowed trail. Serafina Whitlock stood beside Thaddeus Granger, her towering frame tense, powerful arms crossed protectively over her chest. The news of Elias Crow's loose tongue stirred old fears within her, the judgment of small-minded folk who saw her size and strength as unnatural rather than earned. Yet Thaddeus remained a pillar of stoic calm, his massive shoulders squared against the gathering dusk, stormy gray eyes fixed on the distant ridge. Without a word, he turned toward the barn, and she followed, their boots crunching in unison on the gravel path. The shared labor of the day had left them both dust-streaked and weary, but the interruption pulled them into a new, quiet vigilance. Inside the barn, the scent of hay and warm animals enveloped them, a comforting contrast to the unease outside. One of the younger calves had injured itself during the earlier storm, its leg caught in debris, and now it favored the limb with a pitiful limp. Thaddeus knelt beside the animal, his enormous hands moving with surprising gentleness as he examined the wound. Serafina joined him without hesitation, her own thickly muscled arms reaching to steady the calf's head. Their proximity in the dim lantern light felt natural now, two giants tending to something smaller and more vulnerable than themselves. The calf's soft muzzle brushed her calloused palm, warm and trusting, releasing a vivid sensory moment, the earthy musk of the barn, the faint metallic tang of blood from the scrape, and the steady rhythm of the animals' breathings syncing with their own. As they worked, cleaning the injury and applying a poultice of herbs she had gathered earlier, glimpses of their past hardships surfaced like stones turning in a riverbed. Thaddeus's voice came low and measured, almost reluctant. Lost a good herd once. Storm like this one took everything. His fingers paused on the bandage, revealing a faint scar across his knuckles that spoke of older battles. Serafina nodded, her hazel eyes softening as she held the calf steady. I hauled freight through passes where men twice my size turned back. Lost my wagon once. Nearly my life. The words slipped out quieter than she intended, carrying the weight of lonely trails and betrayals that had hardened her resilient spirit. In sharing these fragments, a deeper understanding passed between them, no pity, only recognition of scars born in silence. A first warmth beat unfolded as Thaddeus handed her fresh strips of cloth, their hands brushing in the golden lantern glow. He did not pull away immediately, and she felt the calloused strength there, tempered by care. His recurring habit surfaced again. He wiped his massive hands thoroughly on the clean cloth before continuing, a small ritual that now felt like quiet reverence for the work of healing. They finished binding the leg, the calf nuzzling closer in gratitude. Serafina stroked its neck, her powerful frame bent in compassion, and caught Thaddeus watching her with a look that went beyond appraisal. Admiration gleamed in his stormy eyes, mingled with something subtler, a longing he quickly masked by turning to check the other stock. Yet she had seen it, that flicker of connection born from shared resilience. A meaningful, emotional reflection washed over her as they stepped back to observe their work. Scars, she thought, whether on flesh or hidden in the heart, did not define a person. They forged the strength to endure and to offer shelter to others. Thaddeus's quiet endurance mirrored her own. And in this barn, surrounded by the soft sounds of shifting animals and the distant hoot of an owl, admiration deepened into the first tender shoots of longing. Not the dramatic sort of storybooks, but a quiet yearning to know the man behind the mountain of muscle and silence. They moved to the next stall, where an older mare favored a hoof. Working together, their massive forms created a harmonious space, shoulders nearly touching as they lifted the leg to inspect. A second warmth beat past when Thaddeus murmured approval of her steady hands, the low timbre of his voice wrapping around her like the mountain mists. "Strong where it matters," he said, the words carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. Serafina felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the rare validation that touched her deeply guarded heart. As they finished and stepped into the cooling night air, stars beginning to pierce the velvet sky, a third warmth beat emerged around a simple shared canteen. Thaddeus offered it first, watching as she drank, then accepted it back with a nod that spoke of growing comfort. The ranch felt more like home in these moments, the poker game's shadow receding against the reality of their partnership. Yet, as they approached the house, Serafina spotted something troubling near the porch, a crumpled letter that must have fallen from the visitor's satchel during his brief stop. She recognized the handwriting from the old envelope she had glimpsed earlier, the one hinting at Thaddeus's past grief. Bending with her powerful grace, she retrieved it before he could notice, tucking it swiftly into her apron pocket. Inside, by the hearth's warm glow, Thaddeus stoked the fire while she prepared a late supper of stew and fresh biscuits. The air filled with savory aromas, but her mind churned with the difficult choice. The letter's contents, if read by others, could expose old wounds, perhaps a lost love or family tragedy that the town gossips would twist against him. Protecting his privacy felt right, an act of loyalty born from the day's growing bond. Yet she wondered if withholding it would deepen the internal conflict she sensed in him. An emotionally memorable moment arrived as they sat across the table. Thaddeus's gaze lingered on her longer than usual, the firelight dancing across his weathered face and silver-streaked beard. In his eyes, she saw not only admiration for her strength, but a subtle longing that mirrored her own, a wish for connection untainted by the circumstances that brought her here. She met his look steadily, her heart stirring with unspoken tenderness. Later, alone in her room, Serafina turned the letter over in her hands, the paper worn and heavy with secrets. She chose not to read it fully, instead hiding it away in her satchel to shield him from further pain. This decision, made in the quiet hours, unknowingly stirred deeper waters within Thaddeus, who had noticed the visitor's missing correspondence and now wrestled with his own guarded past, pressing closer to the surface. The mountain night wrapped the ranch in stillness, but beneath it, their emotional ties strengthened even as new uncertainties loomed. Serafina's protective choice had woven another thread between them, one that might either bind them closer or unravel in the light of truth. The mountain night deepened around the ranch house, wrapping its sturdy timbers in a cloak of velvet darkness pierced only by the soft glow of lanterns. Serafina Whitlock moved through the kitchen with her characteristic quiet strength, clearing the remnants of supper while her mind lingered on the hidden letter tucked safely in her satchel. The decision to shield Thaddeus weighed on her, a quiet act of loyalty that stirred both warmth and uncertainty in her broad chest. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the faint, crisp scent of high-altitude frost. Thaddeus Granger sat by the hearth, his massive frame casting a long shadow that danced with the flames. He had been quieter than usual since the visitor's departure, his stormy gray eyes distant, as if tracing old trails in his memory. The poker game that had brought her here seemed farther away with each passing day, yet its echoes refused to fade entirely. Serafina poured 2 mugs of herbal tea, the steam rising fragrant with wild mint and chamomile she had dried herself, and carried them to the fireside. He accepted one with a nod, his enormous hands enveloping the mug completely. As always, he wiped his palms thoroughly on the clean cloth from his belt first, his recurring ritual of care, before gripping it. The simple gesture, repeated so faithfully, now felt like an anchor in their shared world, a small testament to the respect growing between two giants accustomed to solitude. They sat in the lantern light, the golden circle pushing back the night's vast emptiness. The fire crackled softly, releasing the rich, resinous aroma of seasoned pine logs, a vivid sensory moment that enveloped them in warmth and intimacy. Outside, an owl called long and low, its voice echoing through the valley like a lonely sentinel. Inside, the house felt smaller, more contained, a sanctuary carved from wilderness, where belonging began to take root. "You don't have to stay up on my account," Thaddeus murmured, his voice a deep rumble that blended with the fire's song. Yet he did not rise. His powerful shoulders relaxed against the chair's high back. Serafina settled across from him, her hazel eyes steady in the flickering light. Sleep comes hard some nights. The mountains have their own way of talking. Her words carried no demand, only the quiet truth of one who had wandered far and found temporary harbors. In this late hour, small vulnerabilities began to surface like stars emerging one by one. Thaddeus stared into his mug for a long moment before speaking again. "Lost my wife years back. Fever took her quick. Ranch felt bigger after that. MTA. The admission came haltingly, each word weighed like a stone lifted from deep within. His massive hand tightened slightly on the mug, knuckles whitening for a breath before easing. It was not a plea for sympathy, but a crack in the stoic armor he wore, like his worn frontier shirt. A first warmth beat passed between them, as Serafina listened without interruption, her compassionate heart opening to his pain. She shared in return, her tone soft yet resonant. "My father raised me strong because the world offered no gentleness to women like me. When he passed, the freight runs kept me moving. Never stayed long enough for roots." The confession hung in the lantern glow, revealing the emotional intelligence beneath her rugged exterior, the quiet resilience that had carried her through betrayal and hardship. Thaddeus lifted his gaze, stormy eyes meeting hers with newfound depth. In that exchange, trust deepened, wrapping around them like the blanket of night. The second warmth beat came when he reached for a nearby blanket and draped it across her shoulders without a word, his touch lingering just long enough to convey protection rather than possession. The wool carried his subtle scent of pine, leather, and honest labor, grounding her in a sense of emotional safety she had craved for years. They spoke then of smaller things, the way the cattle sensed coming weather, the stubbornness of mountain soil, the peace found in mending what was broken. Their conversation flowed like a slow river, sparse yet meaningful, each revelation building reliance. Serafina felt the emotional dependence grow, not as weakness, but as the natural pull of two strong souls finding shelter in one another. His presence, so physically imposing, now offered a rare harbor where her guarded heart could breathe. A meaningful emotional reflection settled over her as the lantern wick burned lower, casting softer shadows across his weathered face and silver-streaked beard. Belonging in the wilderness, she realized, was not about claiming land or winning games of chance. It was forged in these quiet hours, where vulnerabilities met understanding and strength complemented strength. Thaddeus had won her labor in a poker game. Yet, here, by lantern light, they were choosing something truer, partnership born of mutual need and quiet respect. The third warmth beat unfolded when Thaddeus rose to stoke the fire, his massive frame moving with restrained power. He paused, turning back to her. "You've brought order here. more than that. The words, simple and sincere, carried the weight of his growing comfort. Serafina felt her chest tighten with tender longing. A subtle pull toward this honorable giant, who asked nothing yet gave space for her to stand as an equal. An emotionally memorable moment bloomed as their eyes held across the room, the silent acknowledgement that neither was alone anymore in the vastness of the peaks. As the conversation wound toward its natural close, Thaddeus leaned forward, the firelight highlighting the lines of hardship on his face. That visitor today, Crow's been stirring trouble since the game. Claimed the wager wasn't clean. Said he was pressured into it by debts he couldn't shake. His voice lowered further, revealing a midterm truth that had simmered unspoken. I didn't seek to claim anyone. Played to end his harassment of the ranch hands. Never figured the pot would hold a woman of your measure. Serafina's breath caught, her powerful frame stilling. The revelation about the original poker game landed with quiet force, shaking the assumptions she had carried since that smoky saloon night. Had it all been less about ownership and more about unforeseen consequence? The news stirred a complex swirl of relief and new questions, casting their budding bond in fresh light, even as it unsettled the fragile trust they had nurtured. Thaddeus watched her reaction closely, his stormy eyes filled with quiet regret and hope intertwined. The lantern flame flickered low, threatening to plunge them into deeper shadows, mirroring the uncertainty now threading through their connection. Serafina wondered if this truth would strengthen the belonging they had begun to build, or reveal cracks too wide for even their combined strength to mend. The night stretched on, the mountains holding their ancient watch, as the revelation about the poker game lingered unresolved between them, promising to test the emotional safety they had so carefully cultivated. The lantern had burned low, its flame sputtering like a hesitant confession, when Serafina Whitlock rose from her chair by the hearth. The weight of Thaddeus Granger's words about the poker game still hung in the air, mingling with the dying scent of pine smoke and herbal tea. She moved toward the hallway with her powerful, measured steps, intending to retire. But the hidden letter in her satchel tugged at her conscience like an untied bootlace. Sleep would not come easily with secrets between them. Thaddeus remained by the fire, his massive frame silhouetted against the glowing embers, stormy gray eyes reflecting the dying light. His revelation had cracked open a door, yet the full truth felt just out of reach. Serafina paused at the threshold of her room, then turned back, retrieving the crumpled letter from her satchel. The paper felt heavier now, worn edges soft from time and handling. "Thaddeus," she said quietly, her voice carrying the steady resonance of mountain stone. She held the letter out as she approached, her towering form casting a long shadow that merged with his own. This fell from the visitor's bag. "I kept it to spare you more talk from town. But after what you shared tonight, it feels wrong to hold it alone." He took the letter slowly, his enormous hand brushing hers in the exchange. Recognition flickered across his weathered face, deepening the lines around his eyes. Instead of anger, a profound weariness settled over him. "You read it?" "No," she replied, hazel eyes meeting his without flinching. "But I know enough from the one I found earlier. Your past deserves its peace." Thaddeus stared at the envelope for a long moment, then set it aside and rose to his full, imposing height. "Come with me." His words were few, yet they carried the gravity of decision. He led her to a small study off the main room, a space she had dusted but rarely entered. From a locked drawer he rarely opened, he withdrew a worn leather ledger, its pages yellowed and filled with careful script. The fire's faint glow from the other room barely reached them, so he lit a fresh lantern, bathing the desk in warm, intimate light. They stood shoulder to shoulder, two giants in a room built for smaller lives, the vivid sensory moment wrapping around them in the scent of aged paper, ink, and the faint leather tang of the binding. Thaddeus opened the ledger, his thick fingers tracing entries with surprising care. Serafina leaned in, her wild chestnut braid falling over one powerful shoulder as she read alongside him. The truth unfolded page by page. Elias Crow had not simply lost her in a fair game of chance. The gambler had owed Thaddeus substantial debts from years of harassing the ranch hands and attempting shady claims on mountain grazing land. The high-stakes poker night had been Thaddeus' final attempt to settle matters cleanly, without violence or courts. But Crow, desperate and cunning, had wagered Serafina's services, knowing her reputation for hard work and strength, after losing everything else. Thaddeus had not sought a housekeeper. He had played to protect his land and people, never expecting the pot to include a woman of her stature and spirit. Serafina's breath caught as the full weight settled upon her. The discovery struck like a sudden mountain squall, shaking the guarded stance she had maintained since that smoky saloon. All this time, she murmured, voice thick with emotion. I thought I was merely a prize claimed. But you were trying to end a threat to what you built. Thaddeus closed the ledger with deliberate slowness, his stormy eyes lifting to hers. In them, she saw not triumph or justification, but raw vulnerability, the stoic mountain man laying bare the moral weight he had carried alone. Didn't expect you, he admitted, the low rumble of his voice cracking slightly. Didn't expect someone who matches the land itself. Strong, kind in ways the wilderness rarely allows. The confrontation bloomed then, not in shouts or accusations, but in honest, heart-stirring exchange. Serafina's powerful arms crossed briefly before she let them fall, opening herself as she spoke of the shame that had burned since the card table, the fear that her size made her easy to barter away. Thaddeus listened with the deep attentiveness of one who knew loss, his massive hand resting near hers on the desk without touching. A first warmth beat past as understanding flowed between them, washing away the last barriers of their original guardedness. Redemption through truth felt tangible, like sunlight breaking over snow-capped peaks. Serafina felt her heart expand, the transformative revelation shifting her view of this giant protector from reluctant owner to honorable man, forged by difficult choices. You could have sent me away that first night, she said, hazel eyes shining with newfound respect and something deeper. Could have, he replied, the ghost of a rare, gentle smile touching his lips. But the mountains don't give back what they claim easily. Neither do I. His words carried quiet conviction, laced with the emotional openness he had long denied himself. They talked deeper into the night, the lantern light creating a cocoon around their towering forms. Serafina shared more of her own hidden scars, the family lost to hardship, the prejudice her strength invited, and Thaddeus offered fragments of his grief. The empty years after losing his wife, the fear of attachment that had kept him isolated. Each revelation deepened their attachment, weaving emotional dependence and safety into a stronger bond. A meaningful emotional reflection settled over Serafina as the embers in the hearth faded to glowing coals. Truth, she realized, held the power to redeem even the most chance-born beginnings. The poker game that had upended her life now appeared as an unlikely bridge to belonging. A second chance neither had sought, but both now embraced. The second warmth beat came when Thaddeus placed a protective hand on her shoulder as they rose, the weight of it steady and reassuring. You are no prize here, Serafina. You're part of this place now, if you choose it. The touch lingered, conveying more than words ever could: loyalty, admiration, and the quiet longing that had been growing between them. A third warmth beat followed, as they stepped back into the main room, the house creaking softly around them like an old friend. They stood close. Two massive figures whose shadows merged on the wall, sharing a moment of profound connection. An emotionally memorable moment bloomed in the quiet, her hazel eyes meeting his stormy ones, hearts laid bare, the air charged with possibility and the sweet ache of vulnerability. Yet as dawn's first pale light touched the eastern peaks, a new sound intruded, distant riders approaching the ranch trail. Thaddeus moved to the window, his frame tensing. Townfolk, likely stirred by crows' tales. The external social pressure that had loomed now drew near, threatening the fragile new understanding they had forged. The confrontation over the ledger had left them closer than ever, hearts raw and attachment deepened through truth's redeeming light. But as the riders drew nearer, Serafina wondered whether the world beyond their mountain sanctuary would allow this hard-won bond to stand, or if fresh judgments would force them to defend not just the ranch, but the vulnerable hearts now entwined within it. The riders crested the ridge as the first rays of dawn painted the mountains in soft rose and amber, their horses kicking up small clouds of dust that caught the early light. Serafina Whitlock stood at the window beside Thaddeus Granger, her towering frame alert, powerful shoulders tensed beneath her worn frontier shirt. The group numbered 4, town men with stern expressions and the air of self-appointed authority. Their arrival, Stuction, so soon after the revelations of the night, felt like an intrusion into the sacred space they had carved by lantern light. Thaddeus's stormy gray eyes narrowed, but his massive frame remained composed, a pillar of restrained power. "Stay inside if you want," he murmured, voice low and steady. Serafina shook her head, her wild chestnut braid swaying. "We face this together." The words carried the weight of their new understanding, a choice born from the ledger's truth. Before they could step outside, a sharper crisis erupted. One of the lead rider's horses spooked at a loose stone, rearing suddenly and throwing its rider near the corral. In the chaos, the animal bolted toward the open barn where several cattle, already restless from the night's disturbances, began to stampede in panic. Hooves thundered, dust rose thick and choking, and the air filled with the sharp, acrid scent of fear-sweeted animals and disturbed earth, a vivid sensory moment that jolted them into immediate action. Thaddeus moved like a force of nature, his enormous legs carrying him swiftly toward the fray. Serafina followed without hesitation, her own heavy muscles propelling her forward, with matching strength. The ranch crisis demanded everything they had. Cattle bellowed, crashing against fences, while the thrown rider groaned on the ground, clutching his arm. Outsiders shouted conflicting orders, adding to the turmoil. Together, they worked as one. Thaddeus positioned himself at the head of the stampede, his massive arms waving a heavy blanket to turn the lead animals, his voice booming low commands that cut through the din. Serafina flanked them with powerful grace, using her towering presence and a long pole to guide the herd back toward the reinforced paddock they had mended days earlier. Their combined efforts created a living barrier of muscle and will, shoulders brushing as they anticipated each other's moves in perfect sync. Sweat streamed down Serafina's sun-weathered face, tracing paths over her corded arms as she heaved a fallen rail back into place. Thaddeus lifted an injured calf clear of the chaos with effortless might, setting it gently aside before returning to her side. Their recurring rhythm emerged. He paused briefly amid the frenzy to wipe his massive hands on the cloth at his belt, a small island of order in the storm, then pressed on. Serafina felt the profound significance of their reliance. His strength complemented hers, turning potential disaster into manageable challenge. The town men, recovering from their shock, moved to help most, but watched in stunned silence as the two giants orchestrated the containment. One called out, voice laced with judgment. "This is what comes of improper arrangements. Granger. Woman like that working shoulder to shoulder. Folks in town are talking scandal." The words stung like barbed wire, stirring external whispers into the heart of their crisis. Yet, in the heat of labor, such barbs faded against the immediate need. A first warmth beat passed as Thaddeus steadied Serafina when the ground trembled under pounding hooves. His large hand firm on her back for a heartbeat, protective, trusting, conveying more reliance than words ever could. She met his gaze amid the dust, hazel eyes steady, and together they turned the last stragglers. The cattle, calm, milling now in safer confines, the thunder of hooves giving way to settling dust and heavy breathing. As the immediate danger ebbed, they tended the thrown rider's arm together, Serafina fetching clean bandages from the house, while Thaddeus held the man steady with gentle power. A second warmth beat unfolded in their quiet efficiency, her compassionate hands wrapping the injury, his massive presence providing calm authority. The outsiders exchanged uneasy glances, their questions about the housekeeper arrangement hanging unspoken but palpable. Once the rider was stable, and the group prepared to depart with warnings about town sentiment, Thaddeus and Serafina stood side by side, watching them retreat down the trail. The ranch bore marks of the chaos, scattered tools, churned earth, but it stood intact, stronger for their united effort. A meaningful emotional reflection washed over Serafina as she surveyed the scene, chest rising and falling with exertion. Courage in mutual reliance was not mere survival. It was the forging of something deeper, a bond tempered in fire, and dust where two wounded souls discovered they were no longer alone against the wilderness or the world's judgment. Thaddeus turned to her, his stormy eyes softened by exhaustion and something far more tender. "Couldn't have turned them without you." The admission, simple and sincere, carried the depth of his growing attachment. A third warmth beat bloomed as they worked to restore order, shoulders brushing while righting overturned troughs. The emotionally memorable moment arrived when Thaddeus paused, wiping his hands once more, then offered her the clean cloth first, a small gesture heavy with significance. She accepted it, their fingers lingering, and in that touch flowed the quiet certainty of emotional reliance. His loyalty wrapped around her like the mountain winds, steady and true. Yet as the sun climbed higher, warming the repaired fences and casting long shadows, the outsider's parting words echoed in Serafina's mind. Jealousy and fear of loss stirred within her, not from rivals for affection, but from the growing realization that town gossip could force choices neither wanted. She caught Thaddeus watching the empty trail with a furrowed brow, his massive frame tense once more. The crisis had shifted their dynamic into profound significance, reliance transforming into attachment that neither could easily deny. But as whispers from below threatened to invade their sanctuary, Serafina wondered whether the courage they had found together would withstand external pressures, now questioning the very foundation of their bond. The mountains watched silently, holding the answer just beyond the next ridge. The sun dipped behind the western peaks, bathing the ranch in a soft amber glow that softened the churned earth from the morning's chaos. Serafina Whitlock moved through the kitchen with renewed purpose, her towering frame casting a long shadow across the wide planks as she prepared a hearty supper. The scent of simmering venison stew, rich with root vegetables and wild herbs, filled the house, mingling with the faint, lingering aroma of wood smoke from the hearth. The day's exertions had left her muscles pleasantly weary, a reminder of the strength they had wielded together against the crisis. Thaddeus Granger entered from the cooling evening air, his massive boots scraping lightly on the threshold. He wiped his large hands thoroughly on the clean cloth by the door, his steadfast ritual of respect, before stepping fully inside. The lines of strain from the stampede and the visitor's judgments had eased somewhat, replaced by a quiet contemplation in his stormy gray eyes. He carried an armload of split wood, stacking it neatly by the hearth with effortless power, his broad shoulders working in smooth rhythm. They ate at the familiar table, the lantern light creating a warm, intimate circle around them. The stew's savory depth and the soft chew of fresh biscuits provided simple nourishment, but it was the shared silence that spoke volumes. After the intensity of the morning, these quiet evenings now held a deeper significance. A space where family found, not born, began to echo through the valley of their lives. As the meal ended, Thaddeus lingered, stoking the fire until flames danced high, casting flickering patterns across the heavy timbers. Serafina joined him by the hearth, settling into the chair opposite, with her powerful frame relaxed, yet attentive. The vivid sensory moment unfolded in the crackle of sap popping in the logs, the warmth radiating against their sun-weathered skin, and the distant call of a night bird drifting through the open window on a pine-scented breeze. Grew up in a valley much like this one, Thaddeus murmured, his low voice blending with the fire's song. Family, cabin. Mother baked bread that could fill a house with hope. Father taught me to read the land. His massive hand rested on his knee, fingers tracing an old scar absent-mindedly. The words carried the weight of cherished memories laced with loss, revealing the home that had shaped the honorable giant before grief had carved him into the solitary protector she knew. Serafina listened, her hazel eyes softening with compassion. Sounds like a place worth holding on to, she replied, her tone rich with understanding. She shared in turn, voice steady yet threaded with quiet emotion. My mother raised me alone after Pa took to the trails. Taught me strength wasn't just in muscle, but in standing tall when the world tried to shrink you. Our little homestead had a garden that bloomed fierce every spring. Felt like belonging. A first warmth beat passed between them as their stories intertwined, the firelight illuminating the subtle shifts in their expressions, his stormy gaze deepening with shared sorrow, her strong features gentling with empathy. In these reflections on lost homes and family, unspoken feelings intensified, drawing them closer in the soft glow. Family, they both sensed, was not defined by blood or chance wagers, but by the quiet choice to build it anew. Thaddeus rose to add another log, his enormous frame moving with restrained grace. He paused, then retrieved a small, carved wooden box from a high shelf she had dusted many times. Inside lay a few faded photographs and a child's drawing of a mountain home. He handed one to her, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The second warmth beat bloomed as Serafina studied the image, seeing the younger Thaddeus standing tall beside a woman whose gentle smile spoke of deeper joys now silenced. She offered her own small memento in return, the locket from her satchel, opening it to reveal the portrait of her mother and the strong-featured child she had been. They spoke then of what might have been, of empty chairs at tables and trails that led away from hearth fires. The conversation flowed with rare openness, each revelation peeling back another layer of their guarded hearts. Serafina felt the emotional significance deepen, intimacy wrapping around them like the mountain mists at dawn. His presence, once a source of wary distance, now offered a profound sense of belonging she had longed for across countless lonely miles. A meaningful emotional reflection settled over her as the night deepened. Family found, not born. carried healing power that transcended the poker game's arbitrary start. In sharing these echoes from their valleys of the past, they were crafting something new, a home forged in mutual understanding, where two giants could lay down the burdens of solitude. Thaddeus's loyalty and quiet vulnerability called to her compassionate heart, intensifying the tender pull she could no longer ignore. The third warmth beat unfolded when Thaddeus draped a warm blanket across her shoulders once more, his large hand lingering with protective care. "You bring that same light here," he said simply, the words carrying the depth of his unspoken feelings. Serafina met his gaze, an emotionally memorable moment blooming in the firelit space, their eyes holding with a longing that spoke of futures tentatively imagined, hearts beating in quiet harmony against the vast wilderness outside. Yet, as the conversation turned toward lighter remembrances, a shadow crossed Serafina's face. Thaddeus noticed the subtle tension in her powerful frame when he asked gently about the man in the locket, alongside her mother. She hesitated, then spoke of her father's departure years ago, not death, but a choice to chase distant prospects, leaving them to fend alone. The details stirred old pain, but she framed it as part of her resilience. Thaddeus nodded with understanding. But, later, as he banked the fire for the night, a ranch hand's earlier casual remark from the morning's chaos resurfaced in his mind. The man had mentioned seeing a letter from Serafina's satchel that spoke of unfinished business back east, misinterpreting the context through the lens of his own past abandonment. Thaddeus felt a quiet doubt creep in. Had her presence here been more calculated than chance? Was she, like others before, destined to leave when the mountain isolation grew too heavy? Serafina retired to her room, unaware of the subtle shift in his demeanor, her heart full from the evening's intimacy. She reflected on the deepening bond, grateful for the family they were discovering in each other. But, as she drifted toward sleep, the weight of her full past, details she had not yet fully shared, remained tucked away. The next morning dawned clear, yet a painful misunderstanding had taken root in the fertile soil of their growing attachment. Thaddeus moved through his chores with his characteristic stoicism, but the echoes of the valley now carried a new undercurrent of uncertainty. Serafina sensed the slight distance in his stormy gaze during their morning tasks, wondering what unseen shadow had fallen across their hard-won closeness. The intimacy they had nurtured now faced its first true test, not from external riders or ranch crises, but from the hidden corners of her past that threatened to fracture the very belonging they had begun to claim as their own. Dawn broke with a crisp clarity over the ranch, the mountain standing sentinel in shades of purple and gold. Serafina Whitlock saddled her sturdy horse with practiced strength, her towering frame moving with quiet determination, despite the subtle tension that had crept into the morning air. The misunderstanding from the previous night lingered like morning mist in the hollows. Thaddeus's gaze held a new guardedness, though he spoke little of it. A supply run to a distant mountain outpost had become necessary after the stampede scattered tools and depleted stores, and they rode together into the higher trails, the path narrowing as ancient pines closed in around them. The air grew thinner and sweeter, carrying the sharp tang of resin and the faint mineral scent of rocky streams tumbling alongside the trail. Their horses' hooves crunched over fallen needles and loose stone, a steady rhythm that accompanied the vast silence of the peaks. Thaddeus led the way, his massive stallion picking sure footing where lesser animals might falter, his broad back a constant, reassuring presence even amid the unspoken distance. Serafina followed closely, her powerful shoulders squared against the climb, hazel eyes tracing the wild beauty unfolding before them. As the trail wound higher, a narrow pass required them to dismount and lead the horses single file. The vivid sensory moment enveloped them in the cool shadow of towering rock walls, the distant roar of a waterfall echoing, like the heartbeat of the earth itself, and the touch of mist from hidden springs, cooling their sun-weathered skin. Thaddeus's recurring ritual surfaced as they paused at a clear pool to water the animals. He wiped his large hands thoroughly on the cloth from his belt before offering her the first drink from his canteen, a small act of care that pierced the growing uncertainty between them. The journey tested their bond with every steep switchback and loose scree slope. Serafina's heavy muscles worked in harmony with the demands of the trail, yet she felt the emotional weight more keenly. The intimacy of the hearthside stories had drawn her closer, intensifying a longing she could no longer deny. The desire to truly belong beside this honorable giant who had come to mean far more than a chance wager. Yet the subtle shift in his demeanor stirred vulnerability, a fear that her incomplete past might unravel what they had built. A first warmth beat past when the trail widened, and Thaddeus slowed to ride beside her. "These passes claim the unprepared," he murmured, voice a low rumble blending with the wind. "You handle them like you were born to the height." His stormy gray eyes held hers briefly, revealing the admiration that still burned beneath his doubts. Serafina felt her heart quicken, the compliment wrapping around her like a protective cloak against the chill of misunderstanding. They reached a high meadow overlooked by midday, the vast valley spreading below like a living quilt of green and granite. Here they rested the horses and shared a simple meal of jerked meat and hardtack, seated on sun-warmed boulders. The second warmth beat unfolded as Thaddeus pointed out landmarks from his youth, distant ridges where he had learned resilience, valleys that had taught him loss. Serafina shared a memory of a similar high trail with her mother, her compassionate voice painting pictures of perseverance and quiet joys. In the sharing, emotional dependence deepened. His steady presence made the wild expanse feel less lonely, her strength offering him companionship he had long forgotten. A meaningful emotional reflection settled over Serafina as she gazed across the endless blue horizons. Second chances through sacrifice were not grand gestures alone, but the daily choice to press onward together despite hidden fears and old wounds. The poker game had thrust them together. Yet, this journey into the mountains revealed how their hearts now chose each other, forging belonging through vulnerability and shared wonder. Longing intensified within her, a tender ache to bridge the small gap his doubts had created, to prove her loyalty through presence rather than words. As they prepared to continue, a loose rockslide ahead blocked the main path, forcing a detour along a narrower, more treacherous ledge. The third warmth beat came when Thaddeus insisted on scouting first, his massive frame testing the ground before guiding her horse with careful, protective instructions. Their hands brushed while adjusting tack, lingering with unspoken tenderness. An emotionally memorable moment bloomed there on the precarious ledge, the wind whipping her wild chestnut braid. As she met his gaze, two giants trusting one another, with their lives in the face of nature's indifference. In that instant longing and dependence wove tighter, her heart whispering of a future she dared to envision by his side. They reached the outpost as shadows lengthened, completing their trade for needed supplies with efficient quiet. The return journey carried a new weight, however. At a fork in the trail, a lone traveler, a weathered prospector familiar with town gossip, recognized Thaddeus and pulled him aside briefly. Serafina waited with the horses, but caught fragments, warnings about Elias Crow, stirring legal questions over the original wager, claims that the housekeeper arrangement could be challenged in distant courts, and hints that Serafina might have family ties back east, seeking her return for old debts or obligations. Thaddeus returned to her side, his jaw set in stoic lines, but the storm in his gray eyes had deepened. The prospector's words had forced a difficult moral choice upon him. Whether to confront Serafina fully about her past and risk pushing her away with his doubts, or to protect their budding bond by withholding the information, potentially sacrificing transparency for the fragile second chance they had found. His protective nature warred with the fear of abandonment that her partial stories had unintentionally awakened. Serafina sensed the shift as they descended, the trail now feeling longer, the silence heavier. She longed to close the distance, to offer reassurance through her actions and quiet strength. Yet the unspoken questions hung between them, like gathering thunderheads. Emotional dependence had never felt more acute. Losing this hard-won connection now would carve deeper than any mountain scar, as the ranch lights appeared in the distant valley below, twinkling like faint hopes against the encroaching night. Thaddeus faced his choice in silence. The journey had heightened every tender feeling. Yet the moral crossroads before him threatened to fracture the very longing that now bound their hearts. One wrong step, one withheld truth or hasty judgment, and the woman who had become his unexpected anchor might slip away into the wilderness once more. The ranch house welcomed them back under a canopy of stars, its windows glowing softly like beacons against the vast mountain night. Serafina Whitlock dismounted with the fluid power that defined her towering frame, her muscles aching from the long trail, yet her spirit stirred by the day's shared vulnerabilities. The journey had drawn her heart closer to Thaddeus Granger, intensifying the longing that now pulsed steadily beneath her resilient exterior. Yet the subtle distance in his demeanor upon their return cast long shadows across the hard-won ground they had covered together. Thaddeus tended the horses in the barn with his characteristic quiet efficiency, his massive hands working the brushes in steady strokes. The air inside carried the comforting musk of hay and warm animals, mingled with the faint, clean scent of mountain pine drifting through the open doors. Serafina joined him, hanging tack with strong arms, their movements falling into familiar rhythm, despite the unspoken weight between them. His recurring ritual appeared as he paused to wipe his large hands thoroughly on the clean cloth from his belt, the small act now feeling like a fragile thread of normalcy amid growing uncertainty. Inside the house, the hearth fire had burned low. Serafina stoked it back to life, the flames leaping up with a crackle that released the rich, resinous aroma of seasoned wood, a vivid sensory moment that wrapped the room in temporary warmth against the chill of doubt. They shared a simple late supper at the table, the stew from earlier reheated, its savory depths offering sustenance but little ease to the tension coiling in the air. External pressures from town had followed them home like persistent shadows. Word of the visitors' reports had spread, and now a letter waited on the mantel, delivered by a passing rider during their absence. Thaddeus read it first, his stormy gray eyes darkening as he scanned the formal script. It spoke of inquiries from distant relatives of Elias Crow, questioning the legality of the poker wager and suggesting Serafina's presence on the ranch invited scandal that could threaten land claims. Whispers of her possible ties back east, old family obligations left unresolved, added fuel to the fire of judgment. Jealousy, not of another person but of the life she might still harbor beyond these peaks, stirred within Thaddeus. His protective instincts, born of deep and unspoken love, warred with the fear of abandonment that had haunted him since losing his wife. Serafina sensed the shift as he passed her the letter. Her hazel eyes widened slightly, powerful shoulders tensing as the words confirmed the fragments the prospector had shared. "These are old matters," she said quietly, voice steady yet threaded with vulnerability. "Threads I meant to cut long ago. They do not define my place here." Yet the admission revealed only part of the truth, leaving room for his doubts to fester. A first warmth beat passed in the quiet that followed, when Thaddeus reached across the table and covered her strong hand with his own massive one. The touch conveyed protection, a silent vow that he would shield their sanctuary from outsiders, even as internal fears gnawed at him. Serafina turned her palm upward, interlacing their collused fingers briefly, drawing emotional safety from his loyalty, even as fear of loss tightened around her heart. What if her past proved too heavy a burden for this honorable giant who had already endured so much? They moved to the porch after supper, the night air cool and crisp, carrying the distant hoot of owls and the rustle of wind through the pines. Thaddeus stood at the rail, his enormous frame silhouetted against the starlit sky, a mountain man carved from resilience and restraint. Serafina joined him, her towering presence beside his, creating a united front against the world's encroaching judgments. A meaningful emotional reflection settled over her as she gazed into the valley below. Vulnerability, she realized, was the truest test of belonging, laying bare one's fears not to weaken, but to invite strength through shared protection. Yet the jealousy and doubt she sensed in him mirrored her own terror of losing this fragile home they had built. The second warmth beat unfolded when Thaddeus spoke of the town's pressure without accusation. They see only the game, not the life we've made. His low rumble carried quiet defiance, laced with the deepening attachment that made him willing to face down gossip for her sake. Serafina leaned closer, their shoulders brushing, feeling the solid warmth of him steady her against the gathering storm of uncertainty. In that moment, emotional dependence felt profound. His presence had become her anchor, and the thought of it slipping away carved a hollow ache within her. An emotionally memorable moment bloomed under the vast sky as a shooting star streaked across the heavens. Thaddeus pointed it out with one powerful arm, and Serafina watched it fade, her heart whispering a silent plea for time to heal the rifts before they widened. They stood close, the night wrapping around their two giant forms like a shared blanket, longing and fear intertwining in the quiet. His stormy eyes held hers longer than usual, revealing the battle within, the love that drove his protection clashing with the old wound of potential abandonment. Yet as the fire inside called them back, a rider approached once more, this time under cover of darkness. It was one of Thaddeus's trusted hands from a lower pasture, bearing urgent news. Crow's kin had filed formal complaints in the nearest settlement, threatening to involve authorities unless Serafina's situation was resolved properly. Worse, the letter hinted at documents from her past that could force her return east to settle old family claims tied to her father's debts. Thaddeus listened stoically, his massive frame rigid with resolve. The moral weight pressed upon him. To protect Serafina fully might require a sacrifice, perhaps relinquishing certain land rights, to appease the claimants, or confronting the past in ways that risked exposing her vulnerabilities and pushing her away forever. His love, though unspoken, demanded he shield her, yet the fear of loss made every choice feel like standing on crumbling ledge. Serafina watched from the doorway, her compassionate heart aching at the burden he carried alone. She stepped forward, ready to face it with him, but sensed his internal struggle, the jealousy of what her past might reclaim, the vulnerability of admitting how deeply he needed her to stay. The night deepened, stars wheeling overhead in indifferent beauty. Their bond, forged in truth and tempered by crisis, now faced its sharpest test. External shadows pressed at the door, while internal fears whispered of endings. One of them would soon need to make a sacrifice that risked everything: the ranch, their reputations, or the tender connection that had become the very heart of their mountain world. As the rider departed into the darkness, the unresolved choice hung heavy, threatening to shatter the belonging they had fought so hard to claim. The first light of morning filtered through the mountain mist, soft and hesitant, as if the peaks themselves sensed the fragility hanging over the ranch. Serafina Whitlock rose with the dawn, her towering frame moving through the kitchen with purposeful strength, despite the restless night. The threats from Crow's kin and the shadows of her past pressed upon her like an unseen weight. Yet she channeled the turmoil into labor, kneading dough with powerful hands that worked the flour and water into submission. The scent of yeast and warm grain soon filled the house, a small act of defiance against the uncertainty gathering outside their sanctuary. Thaddeus Granger joined her shortly after, his massive boots leaving faint traces of dew on the threshold. The journey's revelations and the midnight rider's news had carved deeper lines into his weathered face, his stormy gray eyes carrying the burden of the choice before him. He wiped his large hands thoroughly on the clean cloth by the door, his recurring ritual of care, before accepting the mug of coffee she offered. No words passed at first, but the air between them crackled with emotional dependence and the painful longing neither had yet voiced. After breakfast, they turned to the hard labor of breaking new ground for an expanded garden plot near the house, a task long delayed by storms and crises. The earth, still damp from recent rains, released a rich, not loamy fragrance as their shovels bit deep, a vivid sensory moment that grounded them amid inner tempests. Serafina's corded arms flexed with each powerful thrust, turning heavy clumps of soil, while Thaddeus worked beside her, his enormous frame driving the spade with restrained might that made the work feel almost sacred. Their shoulders brushed occasionally, two giants reclaiming worth through shared toil, the rhythm of their labor a silent language of reliance. Sweat traced paths down Serafina's sun-weathered neck, darkening her worn sleeves, as the sun climbed and warmed their backs. The external pressures, the formal complaints, the whispers of forced return east, fueled a fierce determination in her. Here, in this soil, she fought for the belonging she had found, her self-worth no longer defined by a poker table or old debts, but by the life she was choosing to build. Thaddeus matched her pace, his protective presence a steady anchor. Yet the jealousy and fear of loss she sensed in him mirrored her own aching vulnerability. A first warmth beat passed when he paused to hand her the water dipper first, their fingers lingering in the exchange. "This ground's stubborn," he murmured, voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "Needs two strong hands to yield." The words carried layers, acknowledgement of her strength, the deepening dependence that made solitude unimaginable now. Serafina met his stormy gaze, feeling the painful longing surge within her chest, a tender ache for the man whose loyalty had become her truest home. They continued breaking ground, the repetitive motion fostering raw openness. Thaddeus spoke haltingly of the sacrifice weighing on him, offering grazing rights to appease the claimants, a choice that could secure her place here, but diminish the ranch his family had built. Serafina listened, her compassionate heart opening fully, as she shared the fuller truth of her father's debts, obligations she had fled not out of shame, but to forge her own path of dignity. The confession stripped away remaining layers, revealing the depth of their emotional dependence. No longer could they pretend the bond was mere partnership born of chance. It had become the very breath sustaining them both. A meaningful emotional reflection settled over Serafina as she drove her shovel deep, muscles burning with honest effort. Self-worth reclaimed together was a quiet revolution, two souls, marked by hardship and misunderstanding, finding in each other the mirror that reflected strength, kindness, and the right to belong without apology. The poker game that once shamed her now felt like an unlikely gift, leading her to this giant whose quiet love called forth her own. Painful longing intensified, a yearning not just for safety, but for the wholeness his presence promised. The second warmth beat unfolded when Thaddeus set aside his tool and helped her lift a particularly stubborn root mass, their massive frames working in seamless unity. His hand steadied her powerful arm, the touch conveying profound reliance and unspoken tenderness. Sweat glistened on both their brows, mingling with the earthy scent of turned soil. And, for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just them, two mountains standing firm against encroaching storms. An emotionally memorable moment bloomed amid the labor as the sun reached its zenith, casting their long shadows across the freshly broken ground. Thaddeus straightened, nose, wiping his hands once more on the cloth before turning fully to her. His stormy eyes held a depth of vulnerability rarely shown, the silver streaks in his dark beard catching the light, like threads of hard-earned wisdom. "Seraphina," he breathed, voice thick with restraint and rising emotion. "These mountains, they've been empty too long. You've changed that. I don't know how to face losing." His words hovered on the edge of confession, the near admission of love hanging between them, like the mist on the peaks. Seraphina's heart thundered, her hazel eyes shining with reciprocal longing and the courage to meet his vulnerability. She stepped closer, her towering frame inches from his, ready to bridge the final gap with her own truth. The third warmth beat surged as their hands met in the soil-dusted space between them, collused strength intertwining in silent promise. The painful depth of their dependence lay bare. Neither could imagine the ranch, or life, without the other. Self-worth bloomed brighter in that shared reclamation, a testament to healing through connection. Yet before the words could fully form, a sharp cry echoed from the lower pastures. One of the ranch hands rode hard toward the house, horse lathered and eyes wide with alarm. "Stampede risk again. Fence line's been tampered with near the south ridge. Looks like Crow's doing. Trying to force your hand." The crisis interrupted the near confession, pulling them back into immediate action as distant bellowing carried on the wind. Thaddeus's jaw tightened, the weight of sacrifice and protection crashing down once more. Seraphina felt the moment shatter, their raw openness suspended in the face of new threat. As they grabbed tools and mounted to respond, the unresolved emotions churned powerfully between them. The near confession a promise unfulfilled, the deepening longing now laced with the fear that external forces might steal their chance before hearts could fully speak. The broken ground lay behind them, rich with potential, yet the true breaking point in their bond loomed closer than ever. The south ridge echoed with distant thunder of uneasy cattle as Seraphina Whitlock and Thaddeus Granger rode hard through the gathering afternoon shadows. Dust rose in choking clouds from the tampered fence line, the sharp scent of broken wire and disturbed earth, cutting through the pine-laden air. A vivid sensory moment that sharpened every sense amid the rising crisis. Seraphina's powerful frame leaned low over her horse's neck, her corded arms guiding the animal with practiced strength, while Thaddeus's massive stallion thundered beside her, his enormous shoulders cutting through the wind like a force of nature. The near confession on the broken ground hung unfinished between them, a fragile ember threatened by the encroaching storm of external forces and internal doubts. They reached the breach to find several posts uprooted and wire cut with deliberate malice. The cattle milled restlessly, eyes rolling with fear, threatening to bolt at any spark. Thaddeus dismounted swiftly, his boots hitting the ground with solid authority. He wiped his large hands thoroughly on the clean cloth from his belt, his recurring ritual of care, even in chaos, before assessing the damage. Seraphina joined him without hesitation, her towering presence a match for his, as they worked to reinforce the gap with spare rails and wire from their saddlebags. Sweat beaded on their brows under the slanting sun, muscles straining in unison as they heaved heavy posts back into place. The external pressure from Crow's kin had escalated into sabotage, pulling them toward painful choices. Thaddeus's jaw remained set in stoic lines, but Serafina sensed the deeper turmoil, the sacrifice of grazing rights he contemplated to shield her, and the jealousy that still flickered in his stormy gray eyes over her past ties. Misunderstandings festered in the silence. She feared he saw her withheld details as potential abandonment, while he wrestled with whether his protective love would ultimately drive her away. A first warmth beat past when Thaddeus steadied a post she held, his massive hand covering hers for a breath longer than necessary. The touch conveyed courage amid uncertainty, a silent promise that he would not let the world's judgments tear apart what they had built. Serafina met his gaze, her hazel eyes filled with quiet vulnerability. "We don't have to give them anything," she murmured, voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "This place is ours to defend." Yet the words stirred his internal conflict. As they worked, Thaddeus spoke haltingly of the letter's implications, revealing the weight of the moral dilemma. Offering the rights might secure her safety here, but it meant sacrificing part of the legacy tied to his lost family. Serafina listened with compassionate depth, her own heart twisting at the thought of him, yielding ground for her sake. The second warmth beat bloomed in their shared labor, shoulders brushing as they strung new wire, the physical closeness belying the emotional separation widening like a hidden crevasse. Forgiveness felt close. She was ready to release old family debts, fully, but courage demanded they face the misunderstandings head-on. A meaningful emotional reflection settled over Serafina, as the fence began to hold against the restless herd. Forgiveness and courage were not grand declarations, but the quiet choice to stand together when separation loomed nearest. The poker game, the ledger's truths, the trail journeys, all had led here, to a love unspoken yet profoundly felt. Near confessions trembled on her lips, the longing to tell him she chose this ranch, this man, above any past claim. Yet fear of emotional separation held her back, the possibility that her full honesty might confirm his doubts and push him toward solitary grief once more. As they secured the final section, one of the cattle broke through a weakened spot, triggering a small surge that required immediate response. Thaddeus moved with powerful restraint, turning the animal, while Serafina flanked it with strong, guiding presence. Their coordination remained flawless, a testament to the reliance that had become emotional dependence. The third warmth beat came in the aftermath, when they stood breathing heavily, side by side, the dust settling around their towering forms. Thaddeus's stormy eyes softened momentarily as he handed her the water canteen first. "You fight like this land belongs to you," he breathed, the words carrying the near weight of confession. Serafina's heart surged, an emotionally memorable moment unfolding in the golden light, filtering through the pines. She stepped closer, her wild chestnut braid catching the breeze, and reached for his call-used hand. "It does, Thaddeus. With you." The near confession hung electric between them, their massive frames inches apart. Vulnerability laid bare in the wilderness. Longing and fear of loss intertwined, pulling them toward the brink of full emotional openness, even as external threats pressed closer. Yet as they mounted to return, a deeper shadow fell. Back at the house, another rider waited, this one bearing official papers from the settlement. The complaints had escalated. Crow's kin demanded not only grazing concessions but a review of the original wager, threatening to dredge up records of Thaddeus's past dealings around the time of his wife's death. Unbeknownst to Serafina until now, those records held a core secret. In the depths of his grief, Thaddeus had briefly considered selling the ranch entirely, a moment of despair that creditors had documented and could now twist to question his stability and right to the land, or to claim Serafina's presence there, invalidated any agreements. Thaddeus read the papers in stoic silence, his massive frame rigid by the hearth, as the firelight cast flickering shadows across his silver-streaked beard. The revelation of this hidden chapter, his near abandonment of everything in the wake of unbearable loss, threatened to tear apart the trust they had so carefully rebuilt. Serafina sensed the profound shift in him, the emotional separation widening as he grappled with exposing this wound. Forgiveness would be tested. Courage demanded he share it fully. Yet the fear that it might confirm her own past-driven doubts loomed large. She approached him, her powerful arms aching to hold the space between them, but he turned away slightly, the stoic protector wrestling with the cost of full vulnerability. The near confessions of the Ridge now felt painfully suspended, their bond straining under the gathering storm of truths too long buried. Misunderstandings multiplied in the silence. Would he sacrifice the ranch's full integrity for her? Or would this core secret from his past force a separation neither heart could endure? As evening fell, and the mountains darkened, the ranch stood resilient, yet the hearts within it trembled on the edge of fracture. The core secret of Thaddeus's past, now fully surfacing, held the power to shatter their hard-won belonging, or forge it unbreakable, if only they could find the courage to face it together before it was too late. The hearth fire burned low in the ranch house, casting long, wavering shadows across the heavy timbers as evening deepened into night. Serafina Whitlock stood near the window, her towering frame silhouetted against the glass. Powerful arms crossed tightly over her broad chest as if to hold together the fracturing pieces of her heart. The official papers lay open on the table, their formal script a stark accusation under the lantern's golden glow. Outside, the mountains loomed silent and immense, their peaks etched against a star-scattered sky, indifferent to the storm raging within the walls. Thaddeus Granger sat heavily in his chair, his massive shoulders bowed under a weight far heavier than any physical burden. The core secret of his past, now dragged into the open by Crow's kin, hung between them like smoke from a dying flame. In the depths of grief after losing his wife, he had nearly sold the ranch, every acre, every timber, every memory, ready to walk away from the only home he had ever known. Creditors held the records, and now those same documents threatened to undermine his claim, to paint him as unstable and question the very foundation of the life he had rebuilt. Serafina turned from the window, her hazel eyes searching his stormy gray ones. The air carried the faint, lingering scent of their earlier stew and the sharp tang of wood smoke, a vivid sensory moment that contrasted the warmth of the hearth with the chill of impending loss. "Tell me the truth of it," she said softly, voice resonant with quiet courage. "All of it." Thaddeus wiped his large hands thoroughly on the clean cloth from his belt, his recurring ritual of care, now performed with mechanical slowness, as if seeking order in chaos. He rose to his full, imposing height, the silver streaks in his dark beard catching the firelight like threads of hard-won endurance. After she passed, the silence here swallowed everything. I sat at this table night after night with papers ready. Thought leaving would quiet the emptiness. His low rumble cracked, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath the stoic mountain man. Didn't signs. Couldn't. But the records remain. They'll use them to say I'm unfit. That bringing you here was another mistake born of weakness. The revelation struck Serafina like a sudden gust through the eaves, stirring fear of loss so profound it stole her breath. This giant who had protected her from the moment the cards fell had once stood at the brink of abandoning everything, including the potential for new life she now represented. A first warmth beat past as she stepped closer, her powerful hand resting lightly on his massive arm, offering the emotional safety he had given her so many times. Yet the gesture trembled with her own terror, that his past despair might echo into their future, pulling him away just as their hearts had fully awakened. They moved to the table, sitting across from one another, under the lantern's intimate circle. Thaddeus spoke of those dark months, the grief that had hollowed him, the temptation of escape, the quiet decision to stay and rebuild alone. Serafina listened with compassionate depth, sharing in turn how her father's abandonment had taught her to run before roots could form, how the poker game had forced her to stop running. Misunderstandings that had simmered now boiled over in painful honesty. His jealousy of her Eastern ties, her fear that her strength made her too much for any lasting home. A meaningful emotional reflection washed over Serafina as the fire popped and crackled, releasing waves of resinous warmth. Emotional redemption was not erasing the past, but choosing to stand in its shadow together, transforming old wounds into the very ground of new belonging. The longing she felt for him had become a living force, intertwined with the sharp fear that this final truth might sever the bond before it could fully bloom. The second warmth beat unfolded when Thaddeus reached across the table, his enormous hand enveloping hers completely. The touch was steady, despite the storm in his eyes, conveying protection and the ultimate vulnerability he had long restrained. You made this place breathe again, Serafina. Not as housekeeper. As the heart I didn't know I still had. His words carried the near weight of full confession, laced with the sacrifice he contemplated, yielding the grazing rights, fighting the claims publicly, risking everything to keep her. Serafina's chest tightened with a surge of tenderness and fear. She turned her palm to interlace their call-used fingers, feeling the immense strength tempered by gentleness that defined him. An emotionally memorable moment bloomed in the flickering light, their towering forms leaning toward one another, two giants stripped of armor, hearts laid bare in the quiet house. Tears shimmered in her hazel eyes, not of weakness but of profound release, as she whispered, I choose this. You. The mountains and the life we've carved. No debts or papers change that. Yet the third warmth beat carried an edge of painful separation. Thaddeus pulled back slightly, his stormy gaze clouding with the weight of decision. If I fight them fully, it may cost the ranch its future. If I sacrifice the rights I keep you safe, but lose part of what my family built. And you, your past may still call you east. The moral dilemma reached its peak, forcing a raw choice between fear and love. His protective nature demanded he shield her, even at personal cost, while vulnerability whispered that true redemption lay in letting her choose freely. Risks and all. Serafina felt the emotional dependence crest into aching fear of loss. The thought of riding away from this man, this home, this hard-won family of two, carved a hollow deeper than any mountain pass. She stood, her powerful frame casting a long shadow beside his, and moved to the hearth. The flames danced across her sun-weathered face, highlighting the quiet resilience and deep compassion that had drawn him from solitude. They spoke through the night in flowing, lyrical exchanges, voices low and rich with the healing language of shared scars. He admitted the jealousy that had gripped him on the trail, born not of distrust, but of terror at losing the light she brought. She forgave the hidden ledger of his despair, offering courage in its place. Warmth beats wove through their words, small gestures. A blanket draped, a shared mug of tea, each one deepening the intimacy, even as separation loomed possible. Yet, as dawn's first pale light touched the eastern peaks, the choice remained suspended. Thaddeus faced the window, massive frame rigid with resolve and uncertainty. Serafina stood beside him, her heart pounding with ultimate vulnerability. Would he make the sacrifice alone to protect her? Or could they choose each other fully, ranch, past, future, and all, against the forces threatening to pull them apart? Everything hung in the balance as the new day broke. The mountains waiting in silent witness to whether fear would claim victory or love would forge their final redemption. One step, one word, one act of courage, and their worlds might either shatter or become unbreakable. The new day broke soft and golden over the mountain ranch, light spilling across the freshly mended fences and the turned garden soil like a benediction long awaited. Serafina Whitlock stood beside Thaddeus Granger at the window, their towering frames aligned as one, shoulders touching in quiet solidarity. The night's revelations had stripped them bare. Yet in that raw vulnerability, courage had taken root. No more hiding behind stoic silence or guarded strength. The core secret of Thaddeus's past despair no longer loomed as a fracture but as a shared scar. Healed by honest light, Thaddeus turned to her, his stormy gray eyes clear for the first time in years. He wiped his large hands thoroughly on the clean cloth, then reached for hers with deliberate care. "I won't sacrifice pieces of this land to buy safety," he murmured, voice a deep, resonant rumble filled with hard-won peace. "We fight together. Or we build something new if it falls. But I choose you, Serafina, not as housekeeper, as my heart's true home." The words, so earned through every shared labor, every quiet warmth beat, every moment of fear faced side by side, carried the full weight of his love. Serafina's hazel eyes shimmered with unshed tears of release. Her powerful arms encircled his massive shoulders as best they could, pulling the giant mountain man close. In that embrace, forgiveness flowed freely, forgiveness for old abandonments, for doubts born of grief, for the chance wager that had become destiny. "And I choose you," she breathed against his chest, feeling the steady thunder of his heart. "All of you. The ranch, the scars, the future we make together. No more running. This is belonging." The emotionally resonant confession needed no grand speeches. It lived in their joined strength, in the way his hand cradled the back of her wild chestnut braid, in the quiet certainty that settled over them, like morning mist lifting from the valley. The external threats from Crow's kin lost their power in the face of this unity. Letters would be answered with truth and dignity. The grazing rights would remain theirs through honest labor and community witness. The poker game that once shamed her now stood as the unlikely bridge to redemption, teaching them both that second chances arrive in the most unexpected hands. Over the following days, they worked the land together with renewed joy. The garden flourished under their combined care, green shoots pushing through soil rich with promise. Warmth beats multiplied in small, cherished rituals, shared bread baked with her strong hands, tools mended by his, evenings by the hearth where stories of family, found and rebuilt, wove their lives into one tapestry. Thaddeus's recurring ritual of wiping his hands became a symbol of reverence for the life they tended together. Serafina's compassionate heart found full expression in protecting not just the ranch, but the vulnerable man who had learned to open once more. A profound emotional catharsis unfolded on a quiet evening, as they stood on the ridge overlooking the valley. The sun dipped low, painting the peaks in hues of rose and amber. Thaddeus pulled her close, his massive frame a shelter and equal, and kissed her with the gentle power of a man who had waited through storms. In that kiss lived every unspoken longing, every act of protection, every moment of healing. Belonging, resilience, and love, deep, earnedness, and true, filled the space where fear once lingered. In the weeks that followed, the town's whispers faded against the visible truth of their partnership. Two giants, strong in body and spirit, had chosen dignity, courage, and family over judgment or isolation. The ranch thrived, a testament to second chances and the quiet wisdom that love grows strongest in shared hardship. Serafina and Thaddeus found in each other not just romance, but the profound healing of hearts long wandering. The fire crackled softly one final evening as the storyteller leaned back, eyes reflecting the embers of memory. In the high mountains where giants walked and hearts learned to trust again, Serafina and Thaddeus built a life rich with laughter, quiet strength, and the deep satisfaction of belonging earned through courage and love. Their story reminds us all that chance may bring us together, but choice, honest, vulnerable, and brave, keeps us there. Wounds heal when shared. Families form when we open our hands. And, sometimes, the greatest victories come not from winning cards, but from winning each other's hearts across the table of life. May your own trails lead you to such redemption. Hold those you love with open strength, and let the mountains teach you resilience. The end. This is a fictional, original story created for entertainment purposes only. All characters, events, and situations are imaginary and not based on real persons or events. The narrative promotes positive values of emotional healing, respect, dignity, and wholesome romance in a historical setting.